Hi folks, and welcome back to the Greer Music channel. Now today we're going to continue on our series of the Roland and Boss SP line of samplers. Now if you watched the last episode, you know we talked about the Boss SP-505, so it only makes sense probably to next talk about the SP-404. However, mine is an SX, so it came out many years later, and also that would be omitting a major link in the chain, and that's this guy, the Boss SP-505 Groove Sampling Workstation. As always, we're going to look at some of the functions that make this unique and special, but before we do that, let's have a brief overview. The SP-505 was released right on the heels of the 303, but is more of a spiritual successor to the Roland SP-808. Notable physical differences include the screen, jog wheel, cursor buttons, and the 2 rows of 8 sample pads rather than the 16-pad MPC style grid of the 808. The back panel includes ports for the holy moly 14-volt power supply, the foot switch, MIDI in and out, inputs for optical, coax, and RCA, as well as an RCA output. The headphone jack is also on the back panel. External storage is accomplished by a smart media drive and allows for up to 128 megabytes, or in other words, about 64 minutes sampling time at the highest quality. Alright, so let's get into the overview of this device. The first thing I want to talk to you is about sampling. So I've got this little PO32 tonic drum machine here that I'm going to use as a sample source. I'm going to choose sampling as you normally would. Now watch, it's processing. For some reason, the first time you hit sampling after you turn this device on, it takes a long time. I don't know if it's trying to initialize the card, and I don't know why the first time takes so much longer than all the subsequent times to try to sample. But what, we're going on 15, 20 seconds here. And there, finally. All right, so now up here you've got your information about the type of sampling you're going to do. Down here it's flashing pads that are available to use. That's kind of typical for all the SPs. Now I'm going to choose mono for this right here. I'm going to choose, standard for the grade. If I go down to long or lo-fi, that decreases the frequency range of the sample by half, I think, on each step. Auto is turned to off. I'm going to actually turn that on. That's where it listens for audio to come in before it starts sampling. If I leave that off, as soon as I push the sample button, it'll start just sampling dead air. I don't want it to do that. Now, here's something that's more unique about this device. I can choose BPM on the inbound sample. Now, I've been working with 75 BPM, so I'm going to go ahead and set that to 75 right here. This device is going to be playing at 75, so I want those to match. Now, like all of them, I'm going to choose the pad I want it to go to. That illuminates. It's waiting for me to start pushing sample. I pushed it. Now it says awaiting trigger. It's waiting for the audio. All right, now if you were paying attention, you could tell that I left... I went a little further than 2 bars. I got an extra kick on the end there, and there's a specific reason I did that. So let me go to my sample. There it is. I'm going to go to, I chose that sample. I'm going to hit Wave Edit. And let me show you something here. So it says sample BPM 75. I'm going to hit Loop. It's rendering the waveforms on the screen there. I'm going to go to the end of all this. And I'm just going to go quick and not wait for it to render the waveforms because it takes a while to do that, and I don't really need it to. Alright, now you see where it's dark over here and where it's light over here, and you can still see the waveform. I can zoom in. That's that extra kick that played before I stopped sampling. And that's really interesting. So it basically said, okay, I recorded this much audio, and that's as much audio as I should have for a 75 BPM loop. So it's already trying to cut off that last little bit there. That's pretty cool. That's a unique feature about the 505 and its ability to target loop areas and cut out areas that aren't needed for that loop. So if I kept this kick on, it would be too long. It wouldn't loop right. It would be wonky. I'm going to go ahead and hit truncate. It's asking if I'm sure. Boom. It's processing. This is a common thing. You're going to be waiting for this device to process a lot. That is because of the smart media mainly. I don't know what kind of RAM this thing features, but it's probably not that great either. But at any rate, you will be waiting for processing. Now, I'm going to tell this thing to put it on loop mode. And now, when I start this sample and hit hold, should be a perfect loop. Yep, perfect loop. So that's something that's really cool is you can set the BPM of the sample when it's coming in, and then it will go ahead and like just select the area of the loop that would fit that BPM, so you don't have to worry about perfectly stopping the sample at the end to get your chops in. It's just a nice feature. It's convenient. It's one thing that makes the SP-505 cool. All right, let me show you something else here. I'm going to take loop off. And I'm going to show you something really cool that this does when you resample. So if you want to add an effect here, I'm going to put on the vinyl sim. Everybody always likes to hear vinyl sim on these things anyway. And I'm going to resample this beat to that pad. So I'm going to hit resample. And right here where it says auto, I've got that turned to on. That's important. So I'm going to choose to resample there. I'm going to hit sampling again. Now it's asking me where it's going to come from. I'm going to choose this pad. And now it's waiting. As soon as I hit sampling, it's going to resample this pad to this one. But you see how it turns loop off? It sampled only the amount of time that was on this first pad to this one, and then it just stopped. I didn't have to manually stop it myself. That's something different than like the 303, 404. There's some of the cool things about just the basic sampling. Now let's get into another feature that's really neat on here, and it has to do with sample chop. There's different banks in this thing. There's the main bank, which is like here where we've just got different samples that I can play. But then there's sub banks, or I guess you could call them sub banks, that have to do specifically with sample chops and with pitch chops. And if you hit pad bank, you can go into the menu here and see your different banks. Now I've been mainly working in user bank 2. We'll get back to that. But what I want to do now is set that drum beat up on one of the chop banks. So I know this sample is picked. I'm going to hit chop, and now it's going to ask me about the resolution I want. Now, this is not a time division. I wish it was. I wish I could say I have a drum loop there and I want it divided into 8 or 16 equal chops. It doesn't work that way. It's more about how scrutinous it's going to be about the transients in the beat. So if I leave it at a 5, it's not going to be as tight as if I put it all the way up to 10, where if I put it to 10, I should get like a kick, a hi-hat, a snare, all the different sounds of that loop separated. If it's down here, I might end up with a kick, hat, snare, and then like another few seconds of part of the beat and then another. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it up to 10, and I'm going to hit execute, and I'll show you what happens here. This process does take a minute. See that? So it just previewed that for me across all the pads, kind of giving me an idea of how chopped up it is. And I'm just going to say yes. I might decide that that was too much and go change the resolution again. It might be not enough, whatever you want to do. But it went ahead and broke that out and put it onto different pads. And it put it into my chop bank, which is a really neat thing. I'm going to hit yes. It's going to take a second to process. Any kind of major operations like that will take a second. But now I have a... So you get the idea that pretty quickly I can take a drum loop and bounce it out into a bunch of different pads. Now this one actually broke that into more than 16 pads. And I know that because if I go into chop banks 1 and 2, I see that this one has an asterisk. That means it actually put some of the remaining chops onto that next bank. I don't want that. I only need a few drums anyway. So I'm going to go into this bank and I'm going to delete all these. We can talk about delete real quick because it's kind of interesting on this. So you notice I hit delete, it brings up this menu, it shows me the pads that I'm working with, and I can choose specifically which pads that I want to delete or not. The other SPs do that, but this gives you kind of a nice graphic interface to go along with. Now, here's the thing that gets kind of annoying. Normally, if I hit delete, I hit a pad, then I hit delete again, it deletes it. In this case, I've picked them, I hit delete, nothing happens. Oh, maybe enter should work. No, it doesn't. I have to hit execute under the screen here. And it's not really that big of a deal, but it's just kind of annoying because they changed the workflow from other machines. And it's just not intuitive. Like you would think that hitting enter would do the same thing as execute. Maybe that's to make it like you have to be more specific about what you want to do and you don't delete on accident. I don't know. But personally, I find it kind of obnoxious. So now in Chop Bank 2, I have nothing. I only have things in Chop Bank 1. So, pretty cool stuff there. That's how the chop banks work. Now, let's look at the pitch chop because this is a very cool thing about this one that's a little different than the others. So I'm going to go back to the main user bank that I've been using, user bank 2. And I've got this guitar note in there, and I'm going to go ahead and do something cool to turn that into sort of a keyboard playable note. So if I hit pitch, and I don't know what solo H or solo L are, I'll probably figure that out one of these days, but right now I just pick music. I know this note happens to be a C sharp, and it's asking me which bank I want to send this into. I'm going to say pitch bank 1. And very similar to the way it chopped up the beat, it's now going to take this and chromatically assign different pitches to different things. You see how this kind of looks like a musical keyboard with your black keys and your white keys? It's going to assign the notes to that. So again, execute. Tell it's a little bit slow. Takes it a minute. That took a minute, but here's the idea. Whoops. You can tell my RCAs are a little loose back here. These things are old. This thing's 20 years old, so it's not in prime condition anymore, but it's pretty good for how long it's been around. So that is the pitch bank thing. So now I have been able to chop up a drum to a chop bank. I've been able to chop up, or not really chop, but resample basically this guitar sound into a pitch bank. You might think you want to try that with chords. I have to say I've not had very good luck with chords. They really sound nasty after you do this. They kind of need to be single notes for it to be decent at all. And even with that, you can tell there's still artifacts that it has added. But it's better than nothing, and it's definitely something that is unique to this device. Now let me show you something real quick about banks as well. Let's say you're working with this thing and you're playing that and you're like, oh, I need this other sound. I want to sample something. And you hit sample. And You go to pick a spot, and it says, error, not sampling bank. And you're like, what the heck does that mean? It's because you're in a pitch bank. If you wanted to get back to sampling another sound, you would have to go back into your pad banks, choose the user bank that you want to use, and then you can hit sampling, hit a key, and it's not going to do that. So just something to be aware of. If you're in a pitch or chop bank and or you're not able to sample, it's telling you error, make sure you're not in a pitch or a chop bank. Okay, let's look at one other thing here. I'm going to mess with this drum loop a little bit. You'll notice here it says BPM adjust. It works as you might think it would. It will slow the loop down. But any more than a couple BPM either way, and it really starts to sound gross. You hear that clicking it added to it. It just sounds really degraded. So it's nice that it has an option for that, but it's really not the best. And I don't understand why so many of these SP samplers, quite frankly, suck at pitch and time stretch. The SP-505, which was really very early, does an excellent job of this. Heck, even the SP-202 has a great pitch adjustment. The other ones just really struggle with that for some reason, and I don't really get it. But if you needed to nudge it, you know, down to, you know, 72, 73, maybe just a little bit, it's not that bad. It's serviceable, but it's really not the best. I mean, computers have pretty much won the war on sampling, pitch, time stretch stuff a long time ago, and it's really no exception here. All right, so let's talk about one of the main features here, and that's the sequencer, because it has a 4-part sequencer, meaning like you can do drums, bass, chords, and leads, or however you want to divide it, but you can have different parts recorded to different sequences, and then you can mute and unmute these like a performance. So it's really cool in that way. So I'm going to start first with just laying down some drums here. I'm going to hit record to get into the pattern sequencer. I've got it set here to a 2-measure loop. It's at a 4/4, and my tempo, of course, is 75 because that's what we've been working with. Now to start recording, I hit the 1 button and then push play. It does this little countdown. Boom. Just like that, I've got a nice little drum beat recorded to the pattern sequence. All right, now I'm going to record some musical elements over top of the drums. So let me push 2 and then start. 2, 3, 4. So, very, very easy to record multiple parts to each of these parts of the sequence. Now, I can let this play. So let me turn off the drums. I'll isolate that piano riff. Now the drums. And you can see it muted the second I pushed the button. It didn't wait for that whole drum phrase to end before it turned off. So it is actually a mute and not just a trigger for the actual sample. So that's how you pattern sequence. Pretty cool stuff all around. This is it's certainly a good device for making beats on. Now, final thoughts. So I'll do the cons first, and that way we can end on positivity instead of negativity. One of the first ones that's going to jump out to anybody using this machine is the slowness, because processing does take a while. You saw when I did the pitch mode, it took a hot minute to change that sample into the chromatic keyboard, because I think, one, it's applying a pitch effect basically through DSP, and then it's resampling it to another pad. So takes a second. Again, it's because of smart media cards. It's just the nature of how they are. So it's slow. Another thing I want to show you that's kind of annoying here is how you can't adjust certain parameters when the sequence is playing. So let's say you've got your drums and this piano thing. Get back to the beginning. And I decide, you know what, that piano is just a little too loud. I want to go in and adjust that. So that's the sample. I'll let my sequence play. Hit wave edit. Can't do it. I cannot go into wave edit and reduce the volume of that sample while the sequence is playing. And other SPs can do that. One of my favorite things about the SP-505 is once I have a sequence built, I can then go back to the sample page and like adjust the volume of the kick or the snare individually until I get a mix that I'm happy with. Can't do it on this one. So you have to use some forethought around that. Button combos are unintuitive sometimes. Like I said, with deletion, you have to use the execute button. Can't use enter, can't hit delete again. To me, that's just unintuitive, and it changes from the workflow on other machines, which is annoying. Let's see, pitch and BPM both leave artifacts. The BPM in particular, outside of a couple degrees of change, you're going to really hear that thing messing up your sample. The pitch, a little less so, but it's still there as well. Still nice to have those things. I'd rather have it and let me choose if I want to use the stuff or not than not have it at all. But, you know, again, I just don't understand why an earlier machine did a good job of those things when this one does not. That's kind of it for cons, though. The other thing I'll just mention is that, you know, like I said, this is 20 years old. As you could hear throughout the video, my RCAs get funky. This particular control knob, let me show you, gets a little weird. You have to turn it real slow for it to behave itself. So that's just part of the things of using older gear, which you either accept those limitations or you figure out how to repair this stuff or pay for someone else to repair it. That's kind of it for cons, though. There is a lot to like about this. I really like the 4-part pattern sequencer. It does have a song mode. I know this is really important to some people where you can take different patterns and chain them and turn it into this whole song. Personally, I don't really work that way. I'd rather just set up my pattern and just kind of mute and unmute and play it live and record that. But some people really dig song mode. It has one. Even though I talked about the artifacts, I still think it's really cool that it does have pitch banks. I like the bank concept in general, having chop banks, pitch banks, aside from your normal sample bank. It's a cool idea. There's some very intelligent sampling parameters, like being able to go in there and set the BPM, that kind of stuff. So it's looking for loop sections as you input the sample. The auto resample feature is really cool. How I don't have to manually hit stop once it's recorded to sample to another pad. The screen in general, tons of useful information on there to see what you're doing, trimming your loops, your waves, all that stuff's very, very cool, very, very useful. And even though it's very old technology, it's worth noting that this device can accept up to 128 megabit or megabyte cards. That does give you about 64 minutes of sampling time at the highest bit rate. The previous SP-303, I think 64 megabyte was the largest it could handle. So that's a little bit of a plus. Aside from that, it's a lot of fun to work with. The sequencer is very tight on this device. It has a lot going for it that I really enjoy, and it's fun to use. So final thoughts, you know, if you're looking for an SP, I don't know if this would be my first choice. I think in reality, I think the best entry to all of them is probably the SP-404SX or SP-404A. We're going to talk about the SX soon, so you'll kind of see what I mean there. I think it's just user-friendly, and it sort of encompasses the best of a lot of the different devices into one. But this is a good choice if you're looking to make beats. I don't think I would pay as much for this as some of the other ones. Certainly not as much as the 606, which we'll get into in the next episode. But even though it's 20 years old, it's still very useful as a music making tool. So if you see one and it's a reasonable price. I say grab it, give it a go. You can always flip it if you don't dig it. All right, so that's about it for me. Thank you as always for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I really do appreciate that. If you have ideas for additional shows, let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time. As I do typically, I'll play us out with another beat that I made on this device so you can just kind of hear it. All right, thanks guys. See you later.